When it comes to the short game, I think the most common question I get asked is, should I keep my wrists firm when I chip, or should I use my wrists when I'm chipping? And I think the second most common question I get asked is, when does a chip shot around the green become a pitch shot? Well, I think we can take both of those questions and answer them by looking at the role of the wrists with these little short shots around the green. And I want to make sure I share with you today the fact that the way the wrists work for the short game is completely different than how they work for the long game. And it could be the reason that you're struggling to hit these short shots successfully. As we discuss the involvement of the wrists in these chip shots and pitch shots today, I'm going to be wearing the HACKMOTION wrist sensor, which is going to allow us to really see what's going on at the wrist level, not something that's always very visible or necessarily totally visible on camera. So the HACKMOTION wrist sensor will be on my wrist, and before we get into the detail of today's video, it's well worth sharing with you the movements of the wrist that we'll be isolating and looking at today. Keep it very simple. The wrist can either move up and down, would be the plane of motion called radial deviation, up towards the golfer. Radial is hinging up, and ulnar deviation is down. So that's the up and down movement of the wrist. And then the flexion extension moves the club in this plane of motion. Extension of the wrist is this cupping of the lead wrist. That would be at the same time as the flexion of the trail wrist. And then the bowing or the bending back here of the wrist would be flexion of the lead wrist. So flexion, extension, flexion, extension. We'll be talking about the lead wrist today to keep things simple. And if you take a look at the graphic on the screen or the avatar of my hand and my wrist, you'll see that the more I flex my wrist, flexion is associated with more of the ulnar deviation as well. So the more I flex my wrist in this plane of motion, the more it also works down because of the way the joint is built. The wrist is a coupled motion. It's not just moving in one single plane. So the more I flex my wrist, the more the ulnar deviation kicks in. Flexion and ulnar would be associated with closed club faces, shots that would go lower than you might want. The opposite of that, if you look at the avatar, would be to see how when I move my wrist into extension, so as I cup this wrist to the maximum, you'll also see how the radial starts to kick in, the up part of the hinging of the wrist happens. Now, the more radial I have and the more extension I have would be associated with club faces that are more open. That's not just exclusive to short game, by the way. That applies to your long game too. So there may be a message in there as to why you struggle with some of your longer shots. But for today's video, we're going to focus purely on those wrist movements and how they influence your shots around the green. As I've already mentioned, the wrists are involved in all of these shots, and you'll certainly see that today. But let's take the most basic version of this shot, the one that many of you use or want to be able to master, the one that feels like there's no wrists, because that's the most easy to do and seems the most predictable in terms of its outcome. And to be honest, if that is the most predictable for you in terms of making good contact and producing a shot that's predictable, I'd encourage you to use this swing. But as you look at the avatar, I want you to notice something. When I swing back from this lead wrist condition of 16 degrees, 17 degrees of extension, and I swing back with no wrist, I've already moved to 9, 10 degrees of flexion, 13, 14 degrees of extension, no wrist, 6 degrees of flexion that time. So there's a reasonable amount of turning of the club there, a closing of the face that I don't even feel. And for me, I think that's a carryover from my full swing, and it may be true for you too. If you are trying to keep the club face closed in your full swing, which typically is a good thing to do, it helps to hit the ball with more ball speed, it helps to compress the ball and improve the smash factor, makes the ball come off the club face faster. If you're trying to close the face and swing from the inside in your full swing, that type of practice could be killing your short game. I'll say that again. If you're trying to keep the club face closed and inside for your full swing to help you stop slicing or to help you hit that lovely draw shot, this type of swing with your short game could be killing it. A club head that's too far in, too far behind you, with too much flexion of the lead wrist and too much ulnar deviation would produce an approach to the ball that's too shallow. one that would typically result in golfers hitting behind the ball very often. And once you start hitting behind the ball with any sort of frequency, you know that the next one's going to be standing up, pulling your arms in and topping the ball or thinning the ball across the green. So an excessively in, ulnar and flex lead wrist that gets the club too far behind you will produce a low point that's too far behind the ball. Now that's an exaggeration that I'm doing for effect on the camera, but many of you will be suffering from this exact thing, trying to keep this swing simple and at the same time making it worse than it's ever been. If that sounds like it could be you, the golfer who gets the club too far in and the club face too closed in the backswing, producing this shallow angle of attack for your short game, then this little station I've set up will certainly help you improve that problem. I've got an alignment stick on the ground, which is more or less pointing at my target line and the ball just to the side. At the back of the alignment stick here, on the same angle as the shaft of my sand wedge, I've pushed another alignment stick into the ground. And really that's there to give me some guidance. It's like taking the grid that you might be familiar with from my previous videos and just extending the grid up into the air a little bit. So there's some physical barrier here to stop me from moving the club too far in and behind me. If I was to do that, I'd strike the stick. So as I set up to this shot now with the same amount of lead wrist extension, 16, 17 degrees of extension there, and I take the club back and keep it above this stick, I'm able to keep that lead wrist in some degree of extension, 9, 10 degrees of extension. There's very little change there in the extension part of the swing, which is keeping the face more open. What I am doing in order to achieve that is I'm adding in some of the upward hinging. And that's the bit that maybe you're not so comfortable with doing. But if you don't do that upward hinging and the club gets too far behind you, I've already shown the problem you're going to get. So using this station will start to train your wrists to have to work the right way in the backswing, keep them above the shaft, keep this thing on plane, and allow you to make much more consistent, repeatable, predictable contact. And if we wanted to keep adding more wrist to the swing, what would be the benefit of that? Well, one of the benefits would be learning how to lengthen the swing to create a faster club head at the bottom, but without producing significantly more power. This would be a great example of when you'd need to do it where you've got very little green to work with. You need to get the ball up, you need to land the ball quickly and softly and stop it from rolling too far. Another example of more speed being beneficial without more distance would be if your ball's sitting down in the rough. You need that added speed at the bottom for the club head to cut through the grass and get through the grass, but you don't want the ball to go too far. So in order to do that, we need to keep lengthening this backswing with the wrists, but in a very specific way. We're going to keep adding the extension and adding the radial. So that's moving the club up and twisting the face open at the same time. The combination of radial up and twist extension open helps to keep the loft on the club face. This is how you'd see expert players with lob shots or bunker shots. You'd see them spinning the face open and having lots of loft to deliver to the shot when they get back to impact. It's the same for you. You're going to need to add the wrist, but in a very specific way. Try to feel like the back of your wrist looks back at you, twisting this wrist into a position where at the same time the club face now is looking back at me. I haven't got this thing turned down, which would be more like a full swing where I want the smash factor to be high, the ball speed to be high, the distance to be more or less maximized. This is the complete opposite of a full swing wrist motion. Twist the face, twist the wrist, club face points back at me, wrist points back at me. We've got 52 degrees of extension and 20 degrees of radial deviation. That's going to set me up to deliver maximum loft to the ball, let me deliver lots of speed and hit the ball very high without going very far. That one's gone miles in the air, pretty much stopped dead. I felt like all I did there was place the lead wrist into the maximum amount of extension as quickly as I could and held it there. Now, the way that I felt that was to actually put pressure with this heel pad of my lead hand. I felt that as the club started to work back, I pushed down on the heel pad And as I kept swinging, I kept pushing more and more down with the heel pad. That pushes this wrist into that extended condition. I got the radial for free, lots of set of the wrist or hinge of the wrist, as it might be described. And then from there, you just want to be confident that you can swing that club with some speed, because all of that loft means the ball's going to go up. It's not going to go far. And so if you've got all of that loft, you need to make sure there's enough speed there that the ball's going to reach your target. Same again, that one was even better. Landed right on the edge of the green, stopped within a couple of feet. So wrists are not bad, just the wrong wrists are bad. Learn how to do this properly and you'll add at least 1 or 2 brand new shots to your game around the green that could certainly help you to lower your scores. In my world, this discussion of the wrists takes us from this basic chipping motion into more of a pitching motion. Where does that happen? Well, for me, it's where the shaft reaches parallel to the ground. Anytime the club head goes past this point, which is really a function of the wrists, we're working and moving into the realm of pitching. Once the club head stays below the P2 position, where the shaft's parallel to the ground, if the club head stays below that, then I think we're closer to the world of chipping. So as you explore from chipping into pitching, you need to learn how the wrists start to work. Hopefully today's addressed that for some of you, giving you some things to think about, some drills to work on and some feels to take away. Guys, if you made it to the end, thank you for watching. I hope the video served as some education for you as to how the wrists work throughout this chipping and pitching action. If you did enjoy the video, make sure you hit that like button and please subscribe to the channel if you're new. If you want to take your wrist training to the next level and are considering getting a HACKMOTION wrist sensor, then you can check out the link that I'll put in the description, which will take you to the website. And for anyone looking to make a purchase, use the code RobCheaneyGolf at checkout. You'll get yourself a 5% discount. If you enjoyed the content in today's video, you may well enjoy the other videos I made on the HACKMOTION wrist sensor. You can go ahead and watch those right here. There's a playlist that I made. And if you want more short game advice, then you could go and check out the video that I made right here, which is my favorite drill for chipping.